Long ago, before lines divided the land and before names like Nigeria, Niger and Chad were written on maps, there stretched a vast Sahel of open grasslands, winding rivers and ancient towns. Caravans crossed the land carrying salt, gold, books and ideas. Scholars traveled from city to city, and knowledge passed from generation to generation through spoken word and handwritten pages. In that land, Islam had lived for many centuries. Mosques stood in every kingdom, prayers were recited daily, and rulers called themselves Muslim kings. The language of faith filled the air. Yet beneath the call to prayer, something was deeply wrong. The faith of the people had grown tired and wounded. Some rulers used Islam as a crown on their heads but not as a guide for their hearts. They taxed the poor until hunger walked openly in the streets. They punished the weak but spared the powerful. They mixed Islamic law with old customs that served their thrones, not justice. Knowledge was controlled, scholars were silenced, and the true meaning of faith was slowly buried beneath fear, privilege, and greed. Many people sensed this contradiction but did not know how to speak of it. They felt that something sacred had been bent out of shape, yet the rulers claimed divine approval. In such times, silence becomes common, and injustice learns to hide behind tradition. It was into this world that Usman Dan Fodio was born. Usman was not born in a palace, nor did he grow up dreaming of power or conquest. He was born into a family of learning, where books were treated like treasures and knowledge was passed carefully from one generation to the next. From a young age, Usman loved learning more than comfort. He studied the Quran until its verses shaped his thinking. He studied the sayings of the Prophet, Islamic law, theology, poetry, language, and history. But more than all this, he studied people. He listened to their suffering. He observed their daily struggles. He watched how rulers ruled and how the poor endured. He noticed how faith was preached loudly but practiced selectively. Over time, he came to believe that ignorance and injustice were more dangerous than open disbelief. As Usman grew into adulthood, he began to travel across towns and villages. Wherever he went, he taught. He taught under trees, in open markets, beside rivers, and inside simple mosques. He did not speak in complicated language reserved for elites. He spoke in a way ordinary people understood. He reminded them that Islam was not only about rituals but about justice. He said that rulers were not above the law. He said that women had the right to education and knowledge. He said that enslaving free people, oppressing the poor, and ruling through fear were moral failures, not signs of strength. He taught that leadership was a trust, not an inheritance. The people listened. Farmers left their fields to hear him speak. Nomads paused their journeys. Traders gathered after long days in the market. Women came quietly at first, then openly, bringing their children. Students followed him from town to town, copying his words and spreading his teachings further than his own voice could reach. His following grew not because he promised wealth or power, but because he spoke truths that matched the pain people already carried in their lives. For many, his words gave shape to thoughts they had never dared to express aloud. But truth has enemies. The rulers of the land, especially in Gobir, began to feel threatened. They were not angered by prayer or fasting but by accountability. Usman's teachings exposed the gap between their public piety and their private rule. The people began to question unjust taxes, illegal enslavement, and rulers who prayed publicly but ruled cruelly in private. At first, the rulers tried to ignore him. When that failed, they tried to control him. They attempted to restrict where he could teach and what he could say. When that failed, they turned against him. Usman and his followers were harassed. His preaching was restricted. His students were attacked. Some were imprisoned. Others were killed. Families were separated. Communities were intimidated. The rulers hoped fear would silence him and scatter his followers. Instead, fear revealed the truth of his message even more clearly. Usman warned the rulers, not with insults or curses but with reminders. He wrote letters advising them to return to justice and ethical governance. He reminded them that power was temporary and accountability was eternal. He called them back to humility and responsibility. But many rulers had grown too comfortable with corruption. They saw reform as rebellion and knowledge as danger. Eventually, life in Gobir became impossible for Usman and his followers. Then came a moment that would change the fate of the region forever. Usman led his community away from persecution in a migration, a hijra, echoing a powerful moment in earlier Islamic history. This was not an escape driven by fear. It was a declaration that faith could not survive under tyranny. From that moment, the movement transformed. Usman declared that resistance to oppression was no longer optional. He called for a struggle not for wealth, land, or personal glory, but to restore justice and proper governance. This struggle was disciplined and guided by rules. His followers were instructed not to harm civilians, not to destroy property unjustly, and not to fight for revenge. Leadership was described as a burden of responsibility, not a prize to be seized. Battles followed, not because Usman desired bloodshed, but because corrupt rulers chose violence over reform. One by one, kingdoms built on injustice fell. Many communities supported the movement, seeing in it a chance for stability, fairness, and access to education. From this struggle emerged the Sokoto Caliphate, a vast state stretching across much of what is today northern Nigeria into Niger and reaching parts of Chad. It became one of the largest and most organized political systems in pre-colonial African history. Yet Usman Dan Fodio did something unusual. He did not sit on a throne. He did not surround himself with luxury. He did not rule through fear. Instead, he returned to teaching, writing, and guiding. He delegated administration to trusted leaders who were expected to govern under established laws. Courts were organized. Schools flourished. Scholarship expanded. Knowledge became more accessible. Women were educated, most notably his daughter Nana Asmiu, who became a respected scholar, teacher, and poet whose influence spread widely. Usman wrote extensively, leaving behind more than 100 works on theology, law, ethics, social conduct, and governance. His vision of Islam was structured but humane, disciplined but compassionate. He believed that faith should protect society, restrain power, and improve the lives of ordinary people. When Usman Dan Fodio died, he did not leave behind gold, monuments, or palaces. He left behind an idea, one strong enough to outlive him. An idea that rulers must be accountable, that knowledge must circulate freely, that religion should serve justice, not excuse oppression. To this day, his story lives on across the Sahel, carried in scholarship, oral history, and collective memory. It reminds us that reform is rarely welcomed by those in power, that truth often walks alone before it gathers followers, and that the most lasting struggles are fought not for crowns but for conscience. And so the people say, a scholar once stood against kings, armed with nothing but knowledge, and the land was never the same again.